of these species are endemic, and biospeleologists discover new ones every once in a while.
The general meaning of the term biodiversity names and expresses the quantity of both animal species and plant species living on our planet. But how many species are actually living on Earth today? To tell the truth, we simply do not know.
About 2 million species on Earth have been catalogued until now. But the total number is calculated to be at least 10 million, 3/4 of which are concentrated in the tropical rainforest. Thus today, we only know 1/5 of the animal and plant species on our planet. Botanists and zoologists describe about 15,000 new species every year. The biggest part of them belongs to the class of insects. On the other hand, the tropical rainforests are being destroyed at a pace of 100,000 square kilometers a year. Today, the tropical rainforests cover only a little more than 7 million square meters, less than half the area covered in prehistoric times.
The destruction of the tropical rainforests, therefore, means condemning thousands of species to extinction.
According to biologists and naturalists, the destruction of these ecosystems, by far the richest in terms of biodiversity, provokes the extinction of thousands of species every year, the biggest part of which is still unknown. This is the real holocaust of nature, a mass extinction similar to that which 65 million years ago eliminated thousands and thousands of species from the planet, dinosaurs included. The protection of biodiversity on Earth is therefore linked to the conservation of the tropical rainforests. In fact, in 2004, the World Biodiversity Association, UNLUS, was founded in the Civic Museum of Natural History of Verona in order to protect biodiversity. It was in this hall that on the 4th of October 2004, the day of the patron saint San Francesco, our association was brought into being. We're inside one of the most prestigious Italian museums, the Museum of Natural History of Verona. It was actually in Verona where, in the 16th century, the first museum in the world was opened in the house of Francesco Calzolari, a famous naturalist of that time. The museums are fundamental structures for both the study and the conservation of biodiversity. The pieces found and discovered by naturalists during their research are studied and conserved in these museums. These pieces represent precious material that contributes to the great project of the registration of all organisms that inhabit our planet. It has to be said, an inventory still far from being concluded. The association has two main missions: discovering biodiversity, that means quantifying biodiversity by means of nature expeditions into the areas where biodiversity is concentrated. A race against the clock in order to catalogue as many species as possible to avoid their extinction.
The goal of the second mission, called Conservation by Education, consists in the protection of biodiversity by means of education. If conservation is to be effective, it has to be based on knowledge, but also on close meshed education measures, particularly addressed to the young. That means educating people to diversity, to tolerance, to the right of life for all organisms, to respect of the balance of nature.
The WBA UNLUS has a scientific committee of scientists, researchers, botanists and zoologists. During the first years of its activities, the WBA carried out numerous nature expeditions to each of the most threatened hotspots of biodiversity on the planet. In particular to Ecuador, which naturalists consider to be the country with the highest biodiversity on Earth per land unit. During these expeditions, naturalists from various universities and museums explored different environments, from the rainforests to the mountain forests, from the paramos of the upper Andes to the caves of Amazonia. In the course of these expeditions, the naturalists collected hundreds of species and dozens of new life forms that were described and catalogued in the scientific magazine Memoirs on Biodiversity. Furthermore, the association supports a project called Biodiversity Project, established in the year 2000 in the schools of the Tre Veneto region. This project has involved thousands of students. Through this project, it's been possible to acquire 40 hectares of tropical rainforest in Ecuador. The conservation of biodiversity can take place in situ. That means on the site through the establishment of protected areas, parks and nature reserves, or in structures like this one. Here we are in the botanic garden of the Monte Baldo. More than 700 plant species grow and reproduce themselves in this garden on the massif of the Monte Baldo, which botanists of the past described and identified as the Garden of Italy. This is indeed an area with a wide selection of very different environments, from sub-Mediterranean ones on the shores of Lake Garda to alpine ones that are 2,200 meters above sea level. Just try to imagine that on this mountain's expanse of about 300 square kilometers, 1,000 times smaller than the whole of Italy, we find half of all the species of Italian orchids and a good 2,085 different species of butterflies, corresponding to 40% of all those registered in our country. An exceptional biological variety that indeed allows this area to be counted among one of the sites with the highest biodiversity, not only in Italy, but in all Europe. Since the 1990s, Professor Giovanni Onore, missionary, university lecturer of etymology, director of the Museum of the Pontifical Catholic University of Quito and president of the Fundación Otonga, has taken action against the destruction of the main rainforests in Ecuador. Thanks to Professor Onore, co-founder of the WBA, 1,500 hectares of virgin forest Otonga with all their great biological variety have already been acquired. But why is it nowadays so important to know and to preserve biodiversity on our planet? For quite a long time, mankind has not been able to guarantee and to ensure the right to exist to the creatures of the Earth. The destruction of the ecosystems and of the species that live in them is perhaps irreversibly changing the planet's biogeochemical cycles and also threatens the existence of the species of man in the long run.
Thus, protecting and preserving biodiversity also means preserving natural resources that could turn out as strategic in the future. In fact, we have to remember that countless animal and plant species contain active principles that humans have understood and learned to use in order to improve their own survival skills in the course of the millenniums.
It's about natural substances from which medicine and drugs are obtained, and they've resolved huge problems in the past, and could in the future permit to defeat diseases still thought to be incurable today. Basically, each species can be considered an option for the future, a resource able to improve the quality of man's life on planet Earth.